So to give you a bit of an easier way to navigate through that material. So module 1, like all the other modules in this subject, are linked to the subject learning outcomes, which are in your subject outline. And I think the most important things here in these learning outcomes is we want people to be able to recall and reflect on foundational intelligence concepts that you have learnt in other parts of the Masters of Intelligence Analysis program, if you have done that program, or if you are an intelligence analyst that's done some internal training in your agency over the years, or in the military and so on, you would have covered much of this foundational material, I'm sure. But we introduce it in this part of the subject because in this subject we have people not just in the Masters of Intelligence Analysis program, but we have people from across the whole university doing this subject who don't have intelligence backgrounds. They might be in counterterrorism, they might be in fraud and financial crime program, or one of the other programs that are in our school. So really, this first module is to try and get people on the same page. But if you, when you go through this module, you find that this material is material that you're already aware of or you feel comfortable with, please go on to module 2. But it might be worth your while stopping here anyway and skimming through some of the material in this module, because it might have been a while since you've last looked at some of these foundational concepts and theories and practice, and so there's nothing wrong with revising these to refresh your memory if it's been a while since you've looked at this kind of stuff. And also, I make the point that a lot of these foundational intelligence concepts are still very contestable, such as the Intel cycle, that everyone kind of gets drummed into their heads early in their career as intelligence practitioners. Is this really a useful construct for people to know about or to learn about still? Those sort of debates are going on still over many years. There are debates around even how we understand intelligence in different contexts and what is intelligence. So that some of those questions will be raised in this module. And clearly there are really important issues around understanding what is intelligence analysis from a methodological perspective as well as a cognitive perspective. And so module 1 will spend a lot of time going through different parts of the intelligence cycle, and in particular spend quite a bit of time on structural analytical techniques, because these are important, of course, for you to reflect on when you're developing your 2 major assessment items, assessment item 2, which is the research paper, and assessment item 3, the strategic paper, for this subject. So as I said, skip ahead if you want to, if you feel as though some of this information in this module is basic, or you've done it before, or there's nothing new here for you. But as I said, I think as intelligence, as the national security environment and the threats and risks have become much more elaborate, complex and hard to understand for our intelligence community, it also influences the way we think about what the job of intelligence is as science and technology is changing. Who are the intelligence analysts now? Are we more data scientists? Are we more people making algorithms in the future, or are we still subject matter experts in certain areas? So some of these ideas about what intelligence is and how it's changing go back to these fundamental understandings we have about what intelligence is and what intelligence analysis is. So again, I'd urge you to kind of, if you want to skip through it, by all means, but perhaps still have a look at some of the material before you move on to module 2. Now, as I said, structural analytical techniques, or SATs as they're often called, have been around for a very long time. And so in this module, we'll go through some of the more common basic ones. Some of these perhaps most of these you've heard of before. But for those people that haven't, these are good starters. These are good entry level, if you like, understanding of structural analytical techniques. And there are lots more elaborate, more complex ones. And some of these are discussed in some of the readings that you've been assigned, and some of them are also available in great references, like Randy Ferson's Structural Analytical Techniques book, which is available in the library and is also available, obviously, in bookshops, which is also a very good source. So when we think about structural analytical techniques, we're talking about a range of analytical techniques to really try and understand what is driving a complex security threat or risk that we as analysts may be asked to assess. And broadly speaking, these can be broken down into looking at structural analytical techniques in terms of looking at now in the current intelligence environment, what are the issues now that we need to assess? What are driving those issues now? So, for example, if we think about the war in Ukraine, which is has been terrible, continues to go on. What is driving the Russian tactical military strategy now in a place like Ukraine? We really need the baseline to understand, to explain what's going on before we can then try and project where if anyone is actually even able to do this, but at least forecast, estimate Russia's intentions in the long term and how we would then respond as in the Western world. So you have explanatory techniques which help the analysts make sense of complex, conflicting information. They are not the analysis. They are not the analysis on their own, of course. They are aids to the analyst being able to bring that information together and to assess it and make judgments and probabilities about what's going on, the who, what, where, and why of what's going on, and the so what, as I often say. Because the so what's very important, obviously, to decision makers. Don't just tell the story, answer that so what question. So explanatory tools look at drivers and causes in the now, and estimative futures and forecasting techniques are obviously looking at drivers for the future. So how is this issue likely to project into the future? We aren't soothsayers, we're not fortune tellers in intelligence analytical business, but we can make estimated probabilities based on the range of variables that we can assess to think within a bandwidth where a threat or risk might emerge and the significance of that. So I think it's really important if you particularly haven't done any structural analytical techniques that you really read carefully this important part of analytical practice. And as I said, these SATs are very critical in preparing your two main assessment items, and I'd ask you to go back to the assessment tasks descriptions for the research and strategic paper, and you'll find out how they fit in. So another important part of Module 1, I think, is looking at intelligence production and seeing how we, in a sense, the factory line that in an agency that makes intelligence into product, as we often call it, how that's changing. It has always been a multi-agency collaborative kind of integrated task, but I think more and more as threats have become more complex, as agencies have become in some sense more specialized, and as resources have sometimes become limited, I think production is much more now multi-agency collaborative and integrated, and trying to get different agencies or different specialties to contribute to the mission of a particular product has been challenging since 9/11 in many intelligence agencies and communities. And there's been lots of successes, I think, in the counterterrorism area, but also lots of failures as well, lots of lessons to learn. And maybe COVID is one of those lessons for the intelligence community. But production isn't just something that happens through the various parts of the intelligence cycle, which you'll learn about in the earlier part of this module. It's also about how do we build a foundation in which that production of intelligence through the different stages of the intelligence cycle can take place. So these are what I call the key enabling activities. So you have a factory that makes intelligence, but underneath you need a foundation which enables that. And these are issues around governance, information communication technology systems, human resource and workforce issues, research and legislation. All of these moving bits need to also come into play if we are going to have effective intelligence production. So I look at intelligence not just as what happens on the factory floor in a functional sense, but I also look at it in a structural sense. And this comes from research I've done over the last 20 years in this area, and this is reflected in your textbook, which is part of this course as well. And the other thing that's briefly talked about in the module, of course, is dissemination and how that's changed. I remember when I was an intelligence analyst, most of there were computer, obviously, versions of products, but there was a lot of intelligence paper products that went up to decision makers with restricted circulation. We now see, obviously, a change to much smaller infographic e-copies of complex issues, bullet points, condensed versions of products being put onto secure iPads or iPhones for the Prime Minister and for the President, for example, of the United States. So no matter how technology has enabled the intel community to disseminate more quickly their intelligence products, there is still a struggle to make sure that what is produced is meets the people that most need to act on it. So I will leave my introduction here to the Module 1 by just reflecting on my Effective Intelligence Framework model, which is in your textbook. And as you can see in the middle here, we have all the parts of the intelligence cycle, which, in a sense, if you think about a factory, makes the intelligent product. But this doesn't happen just in a vacuum. In an agency or across the Australian intelligence community, you also need to have effective leadership of all the human resources, of all the technical resources. You also need a really good intelligence information technology capabilities, enable us to share, collect and assess intelligence, and periodically, particularly in law enforcement, this has been a problem. You need a good workforce strategic plan about, given the threats are changing in our intelligence world, in our intelligence community, how do we develop the workforce to make sure it can understand what it needs to do in making these assessments? And obviously, in legislation is constantly changing as the threats change. You think about, just even since 9/11, how much legislation there is in Australia for enabling various intelligence and law enforcement agencies to collect intelligence. And there have been lots of debates, of course, about whether they've been too excessive or not, or lack coordination, and so on. And these debates will continue on. And you also need the intelligence community and agencies and broader writ large intelligence community, which have many agencies, tend to be very, by their nature, secretive operations and traditionally, historically, less open to external benchmarking of excellence. And I think what's really, really important if you want to have good intelligence production is to have an area that looks out to the world to bring in best practice, to build research around how to build better intelligence systems and processes which will mean in better warning of national security threats and risks by our intelligence community for senior decision makers who have to manage that risk. So that's the brief overview of Module 1. And now I just invite you to start reading those notes and looking at those activity questions that are peppered throughout that module, which I think are really excellent for you to do. I suggest you do those. You don't have to read all of the readings that are there. I would just read some abstracts of those readings, read some introduction and conclusions to get a sense of what they're about. And if you have time later in the subject, go back to them by all means. But they're there for you to use beyond the learning experience in this semester. And you can also share your points of view about some of the material learning in the module or in the discussion as well. But that, of course, is not mandatory. Thank you.